Close your eyes for just a moment. Feel the steady rhythm of your breathing, the comfortable weight of your blanket, the familiar sounds of your evening settling around you. Now, let me take you somewhere else entirely, somewhere your ancestors once walked, though they would barely recognize you as their descendants, just as you would barely recognize them as your own blood. You're standing at the edge of a primordial forest, 300 million years ago. The air hits you first, thick as soup, almost chewy with moisture and oxygen. Each breath fills your lungs with an atmosphere so rich it makes you dizzy, so dense it seems to shimmer like liquid mercury in the filtered light. This isn't the crisp, clean air you know. This is the breath of a young, wild planet, drunk on its own abundance. The forest before you towers impossibly high. Tree ferns stretch their fronds toward a sky you can barely glimpse through the canopy, some reaching heights that would make modern redwoods seem modest. The understory writhes with life, but not life as you know it. Shadows move with purpose through the steam and mist, flowing like liquid nightmares between the massive trunks. Something rustles in the foliage above, and instinctively, every nerve in your borrowed ancient body screams a single word: run. Welcome, dear viewer, to History for Sleep. I'm genuinely curious. Where are you right now as you listen to this? Are you nestled under covers in your favorite spot, perhaps with the lights dimmed and the world quiet around you? Maybe you're taking a peaceful evening walk, or settling into that perfect late-night moment when curiosity draws you toward the mysterious corners of our past. Wherever you are, whatever brought you here tonight, I'm grateful you've chosen to join me on this journey through deep time. I should probably warn you, this particular story might keep you awake longer than usual. Not because it's frightening, necessarily, but because it's so utterly extraordinary that your mind might refuse to let it go. Tonight, we're going to explore a chapter of history that reads like the fever dream of some cosmic storyteller, except every word of it actually happened. We're going to walk in the footsteps of creatures so alien, so magnificently terrifying, that they challenge everything we think we know about the natural world. Picture this. When your ancestors were barely recognizable as mammals, creatures so small and primitive they might have been mistaken for particularly clever lizards, the undergrowth belonged to eight-legged titans. We're not talking about the spiders you might encounter in your garden, or even the impressive tarantulas that make some people nervous. We're talking about arachnids the size of city buses, predators so massive and sophisticated that they turned the entire forest floor into their personal hunting ground. This is a bedtime story, make no mistake, but it's a bedtime story about survival, evolution, and the monsters that shaped our bloodline. Every breath your ancestors took, every careful step they placed, every moment they managed to stay alive long enough to reproduce. All of it happened under the shadow of creatures that could have stepped out of humanity's darkest nightmares. The world they inhabited was a greenhouse paradise that doubled as a predator's playground. Imagine swamplands that stretched beyond every horizon, where the air itself seemed alive with possibility and danger. The oxygen content of the atmosphere had soared to levels that would be toxic to us today, 35% compared to our modern 21%. This supercharged atmosphere didn't just support life, it inflated it, stretched it, turned it into something larger and more voracious than anything our planet had seen before or would see again. In this oxygen-drunk world, the rules of biology bent in ways that seem almost magical. Insects grew to the size of seagulls. Millipedes stretched longer than alligators, their countless legs carrying armored bodies through the undergrowth like biological tanks. Dragonflies patrolled the air with wingspans that could shadow a grown person. But none of these commanded the respect and terror reserved for the giant arachnids. These weren't just larger versions of modern spiders scaled up like movie monsters. They were something altogether more sophisticated, more alien, more perfectly adapted to their role as apex predators. They had evolved for nearly 400 million years before our ancestors even began their tentative climb toward consciousness. They were the product of countless generations of refinement, each iteration becoming more efficient at the singular task of finding, catching, and consuming other living things. Your ancestor, let's call them your ancient grandparent, though the relationship is separated by hundreds of millions of years, was roughly the size of a rat, covered in primitive scales that offered little protection and even less warmth. They possessed no tools, no fire, no language, no cooperation beyond the most basic family groups. Their survival strategy was elegantly simple: hide, run, and try not to be in the wrong place when death came looking for a meal. But death was patient in those days, and it had 8 legs. The giant arachnids had turned patience into an art form. They could remain motionless for days, waiting in positions that optimized their strike range. Their bodies were living sensor arrays, capable of detecting the slightest vibration through the forest floor, the most subtle change in air pressure, the faintest chemical signature of approaching prey. When they moved, it was with a precision that spoke to millions of years of evolutionary refinement. No wasted motion, no hesitation, no mercy. Recent fossil discoveries have revealed details about these encounters that read like the most visceral survival thriller ever written. We've found bite marks on the bones of early mammals, perfectly spaced puncture wounds that match the fang patterns of giant arachnids. We've discovered trackways preserved in ancient mud that tell stories of pursuit, of desperate flight, of predators that seem to understand their prey's psychology better than the prey understood it themselves. The forest floor was their domain, but they weren't confined to it. Some species had mastered 3-dimensional hunting, creating elaborate web systems that turned entire groves into deadly mazes. Others had developed pack behaviors that suggest a level of coordination and intelligence that challenges our assumptions about arachnid cognition. They didn't just hunt, they orchestrated hunts, turning the forest into a stage where they were both director and lead performer in dramas of survival that played out every single day. Tonight, we're going to walk through those ancient swamps together. We'll explore the fossil evidence that reveals how these encounters shaped not just the bodies of our ancestors, but their minds, their instincts, their very souls. We'll discover how the terror of being hunted by creatures so alien and efficient embedded itself so deeply in mammalian psychology that we still carry those fear responses today, 300 million years later. We'll witness the evolutionary arms race that played out across geological timescales, where every advantage gained by prey was matched by an even greater adaptation in their hunters. We'll see how the very characteristics that make us recognizably mammalian, our alertness, our social cooperation, our remarkable ability to detect and respond to threats, were forged in the crucible of a world where 8-legged death could strike from any shadow. This journey will take us through landscapes so alien they might as well be on another planet, yet so fundamental to our own existence that every heartbeat, every breath, every moment of consciousness you experience is built upon the foundation of creatures who managed to survive when survival seemed impossible. The story we're about to explore together isn't just about ancient monsters and the brave little mammals who escaped them. It's about the deepest roots of fear, the evolutionary heritage that connects you to creatures so small and vulnerable that their very existence was a miracle of timing, luck, and desperate ingenuity. So settle in, get comfortable, and prepare yourself for a tale that spans hundreds of millions of years, where the stakes were nothing less than the entire future of complex life on Earth. We're about to discover why arachnids weren't just creepy crawlies in the ancient world. They were apex predators who held the fate of our entire evolutionary lineage in their chelicerae. and who shaped the deepest patterns of mammalian existence through the simple act of being utterly, magnificently terrifying. The story begins in a time so distant it challenges the very limits of imagination, the Carboniferous period stretching from 358.9 to 298.9 million years ago. 60 million years of planetary adolescence, when Earth was experimenting with life in ways so extravagant and alien that the results would seem like science fiction if we didn't have the fossils to prove otherwise. To understand just how foreign this world was, we need to start with something as fundamental as breathing. Every breath you take right now draws in air that's roughly 21% oxygen, a perfect balance that keeps you conscious without setting your lungs on fire. But step into the Carboniferous atmosphere, and that ratio skyrockets to 35%. The air itself becomes a drug, supercharging every living cell, enabling metabolisms that seem impossible by today's standards. Imagine trying to light a campfire in that world. The smallest spark would explode into an inferno that could race across continents. Lightning strikes didn't just start forest fires, they triggered planetary conflagrations that could be seen from space if anyone had been watching from above. The very atmosphere was a loaded weapon, primed and ready to turn the entire world into a furnace at the slightest provocation. Yet this same dangerous abundance created a greenhouse paradise unlike anything in Earth's history. Global temperatures soared 6 to 8 degrees Celsius above what we experience today. Ice caps were a fantasy. Not a single glacier existed on the entire planet. Tropical conditions stretched from equator to pole, turning even the Arctic regions into steaming jungles where massive ferns cast shadows across landscapes that would remain warm and humid throughout the year. Picture standing in one of these ancient forests, and you might think you've stumbled into the nave of some impossible cathedral. Tree ferns thrust their trunks skyward for 100 feet or more, their fronds spreading into vaulted canopies that filtered the light into something ethereal and green. The scale defied comprehension. Individual leaves the size of modern trees, root systems that could anchor buildings, trunk diameters that would challenge the engineering of any suspension bridge. These weren't the delicate ornamental ferns you might recognize from a modern garden. These were architectural giants, living skyscrapers that created vertical ecosystems stretching from the soggy forest floor to the mist-shrouded canopy. Some species developed hollow trunks that could house entire communities of smaller creatures, while others grew so densely that they formed living walls, natural barriers that channeled the movement of every creature unfortunate enough to call this world home. The forest floor beneath these giants was a universe unto itself, a carpet of decay and growth so thick and rich that entire ecosystems flourished in the spaces between fallen logs. Massive club mosses created their own understory, some reaching 40 feet in height, their surfaces covered in patterns that seemed almost deliberately decorative, as if evolution had decided to experiment with art alongside function. But perhaps the most remarkable feature of this Carboniferous paradise was its relationship with water. Vast swamplands stretched across entire continents, creating an interconnected network of wetlands that could swallow modern countries without a trace. These weren't the tidy, seasonal wetlands we might recognize today. These were permanent, primordial oceans of shallow water, mud, and vegetation that persisted for millions of years, slowly building up layers of organic matter that would eventually become the coal deposits that powered human civilization. The water itself told its own story of abundance. Rivers meandered lazily through landscapes with no hurry to reach the sea, creating oxbow lakes and temporary islands that appeared and disappeared with the seasons. Seasonal flooding was so extensive that the distinction between land and water became meaningless across vast regions. Our ancestors learned to navigate a world where today's solid ground might be tomorrow's swamp bottom. where survival meant understanding the rhythms of a planet that seemed to reshape itself with every storm. This atmospheric cocktail of heat, humidity, and supercharged oxygen created what scientists now recognize as the ultimate evolutionary pressure cooker. Resources were so abundant that the traditional limitations on growth simply didn't apply. If you could process that oxygen-rich air efficiently, if you could handle the heat and humidity, if you could navigate the complex three-dimensional maze of the forest, then the world was yours for the taking. The paradox of this paradise was that its very generosity made it lethal. The same atmospheric conditions that allowed giants to thrive also turned the planet into a tinderbox. Forest fires weren't occasional disasters. They were routine resets, natural processes that cleared vast areas and allowed new growth to begin the cycle again. Lightning could ignite fires that burned for months, consuming entire ecosystems and forcing every living creature into a constant state of readiness for evacuation. Volcanic activity added another layer of chaos to this already unpredictable world. The continents themselves were still finding their positions, grinding against each other with forces that split mountains and birthed new seas overnight. Volcanic ranges poured ash and gases into an atmosphere already saturated with exotic chemistry, creating weather patterns that could shift with bewildering speed. The result was a world where evolutionary adaptation happened not over comfortable geological timescales, but in desperate, real-time responses to environmental chaos. Creatures that could handle sudden temperature swings, toxic gas clouds, massive floods, and continental fires didn't just survive, they dominated. Those that couldn't adapt quickly enough simply vanished, leaving behind only the faintest traces in the fossil record. This was the stage upon which the drama of our deep ancestry would unfold. Every advantage evolution could provide was magnified by the supercharged atmosphere. Predators became larger, faster, more efficient. Prey animals developed heightened senses, improved reflexes, more sophisticated escape strategies. The entire ecosystem operated at a metabolic rate that seems almost supernatural by modern standards. In this world of giants, size wasn't just an advantage, it was often a requirement for survival. The insects alone reached proportions that seem like the products of atomic age monster movies. Dragonflies patrolled the airways with wingspans approaching 3 feet, their compound eyes capable of tracking movement across vast distances. Millipedes grew longer than modern crocodiles, their countless legs carrying armored bodies through underbrush like living, breathing tanks. But it was the arachnids who truly mastered this alien paradise. While other creatures grew large by accident, seeming to stumble into gigantism as a byproduct of environmental abundance, the spiders and their relatives grew large with purpose. Every aspect of their anatomy scaled up with mechanical precision, creating predators so perfectly adapted to their environment that they seemed less like animals and more like evolution's own carefully crafted instruments of death. The web systems they created transformed the forest architecture itself. Imagine silk strands strong enough to anchor to 100-foot trees, creating aerial highways and trap networks that spanned acres. Picture hunting grounds where the very air could become a weapon, where movement in any direction might trigger carefully positioned snares designed by minds alien yet brilliantly tactical. Our mammalian ancestors entered this world as immigrants to a hostile country where they didn't speak the language and couldn't read the signs. Every adaptation they had developed over their earlier evolutionary history suddenly seemed quaint and inadequate. They were warm-blooded creatures in a world designed for cold-blooded efficiency, small animals in an ecosystem built for giants, ground dwellers in a three-dimensional hunting preserve where death could strike from above, below, or any point on the compass. The Carboniferous wasn't just a different time, it was a different planet entirely, operating under biological rules so foreign that modern ecosystems would seem sterile and lifeless by comparison. It was a world where the very air could kill you, where the ground might swallow you whole, where the canopy above teemed with predators that had turned hunting into a high art. Yet somehow, impossibly, our ancestors not only survived in this world, they learned to thrive in it. They developed the survival instincts, the sensory capabilities, the behavioral patterns that would echo through every generation that followed. They became the protagonists in a survival story so improbable that it borders on the miraculous. The stage was set, the atmosphere literally charged with possibility and danger. The forest cathedral stretched endlessly in every direction, its living architecture providing both shelter and trap for countless millions of creatures. The oxygen-rich air hummed with an energy that made every heartbeat stronger, every movement more urgent, every moment more intensely alive. This was the world where arachnids would write their masterpiece in silk and venom, where our ancestors would learn the first lessons in mammalian survival, where the fundamental relationship between predator and prey would be established through countless generations of desperate, brilliant, and ultimately successful adaptation to a planet that seemed designed to test the very limits of what life could become. In this theatre of evolutionary extremes, one group of performers would claim the spotlight with such terrifying grace that their legacy still haunts us today. The architects of terror were already ancient when the Carboniferous began. Arachnids, whose lineage stretched back nearly 400 million years, veterans of survival who had spent geological ages perfecting the art of predation. Meet Megarachne cervinae, discovered in the rocky deposits of Argentina's Bajo de Veliz formation. When paleontologists first assembled its fossil remains, they thought they had uncovered the ultimate nightmare, a spider with a body measuring 54 centimeters in length and leg spans reaching 50 centimeters across. For years, Megarachne held the terrifying distinction of being the largest spider that had ever lived, a creature so imposing that its very existence seemed to mock the comfortable boundaries between reality and horror fiction. Science, however, has a way of reshaping our monsters even as it reveals new ones. Later analysis reclassified Megarachne as a sea scorpion rather than a true spider, but this revision did nothing to diminish its menace. If anything, it opened the door to even more unsettling possibilities. Sea scorpions were marine predators that had mastered both aquatic and terrestrial hunting, creatures comfortable in water and on land, capable of pursuing prey across multiple environments with the relentless efficiency of a natural disaster. The true giants of the Carboniferous arachnid world were even more extraordinary than our reclassified sea scorpion friend. These were creatures whose bodies resembled armoured tanks designed by a committee of nightmares, their legs spanning wider than a human's outstretched arms, their movements carrying the deliberate weight of apex predators who had never learned to fear anything. Picture yourself walking through one of those primordial forests we explored in our previous journey. Every fallen log becomes a potential hiding place for something with 8 legs and an appetite. The massive tree trunks that create such majestic cathedral spaces also cast shadows deep enough to conceal predators the size of modern automobiles. What appears to be a moss-covered boulder might shift suddenly, revealing itself as the carapace of something that has been watching you with clusters of eyes more sophisticated than any camera system. The scale of these creatures defies comfortable comprehension. Imagine a spider the size of a coffee table, but built with the engineering principles of a medieval siege engine. Their legs weren't the delicate articulated limbs of modern arachnids scaled up. They were hydraulic masterpieces, capable of supporting massive body weight while maintaining the lightning-quick reflexes that made them such effective hunters. Each leg was a complex system of muscles, joints, and fluid chambers that could launch their considerable bulk across distances that would make Olympic long jumpers weep with envy. Their bodies were living fortresses, protected by exoskeletons that combined flexibility with armor-like durability. The chitin plates that covered their surfaces weren't just protective gear. They were carefully engineered composite materials that could deflect attacks while remaining light enough to allow for surprising speed and agility. These creatures moved through their world with the confidence of beings who had been refined by hundreds of millions of years of evolutionary testing. The sensory systems these giants possessed would make modern surveillance technology seem primitive by comparison. Their eyes, typically 8 of them arranged in complex patterns across their carapaces, could detect movement across vast distances, process visual information at speeds that allowed them to track multiple prey animals simultaneously and distinguish between the slightest variations in shadow and light that might indicate approaching food or potential threats. But vision was just the beginning of their sensory arsenal. Their legs were equipped with detection systems so sensitive they could feel the heartbeat of a small mammal through several inches of forest floor. Vibrations that would be completely unnoticeable to us registered to them as clearly as if someone had shouted directions. They could sense the approach of prey animals from distances that gave them plenty of time to position themselves for optimal strikes. Their chelicerae, the feeding appendages that delivered both venom and crushing force, were engineering marvels scaled to match their massive bodies. These weren't simple fangs, but complex mechanical systems capable of piercing, injecting, and processing prey with surgical precision. The venom they produced was sophisticated enough to immobilize creatures much larger than our mammalian ancestors, while keeping the meat fresh for extended feeding sessions. These giants had turned patience into a tactical advantage. They could remain motionless for days at a time, their metabolisms so efficient that long periods of inactivity actually improved their hunting effectiveness. When prey animals passed through their territories, these arachnids had already calculated optimal attack angles, planned escape routes, and prepared backup strategies in case their initial approach failed. The hunting grounds they claimed as territory were vast by the standards of any modern predator. A single giant arachnid might control several square miles of forest, marking boundaries with chemical signatures that served as both warning and invitation. Warning to potential competitors, invitation to unsuspecting prey animals who might mistake the scent markers for something benign. Their preferred environments were the interfaces between different habitat types. The edges where swampland met dry forest, where open clearings bordered dense undergrowth, where streams carved paths through otherwise impenetrable vegetation. These edge zones concentrated prey movement, creating natural funnels where hunting success rates approached certainty. Recent fossil discoveries have begun to reveal aspects of these creatures that challenge our assumptions about arachnid behavior and intelligence. Trackway evidence suggests that some species engaged in coordinated hunting activities, with multiple individuals working together to drive prey animals toward predetermined kill zones. The spacing and timing of these tracks imply a level of communication and strategic planning that seems almost impossible for creatures we typically think of as simple predators. Even more intriguing are the fossil assemblages that suggest these giants may have engaged in behaviors that can only be described as teaching. Adult and juvenile track patterns found in close association show movement sequences that appear to be instructional. Older individuals demonstrating hunting techniques to younger ones, passing down behavioral knowledge across generations in ways that speak to complex social structures. The sophistication of their web construction, where evidence exists, suggests engineering capabilities that rival modern architects. These weren't simple prey-catching nets, but three-dimensional structures that could span multiple trees, incorporating tension systems, anchor points, and even what appear to be intentional weak points designed to channel prey movement in specific directions. Some species developed hunting strategies that exploited the unique atmospheric conditions of their time. The high oxygen content, that allowed them to grow so large also affected the behavior of their prey animals, making smaller creatures more active and less cautious. Giant arachnids learned to capitalize on this atmospheric influence, timing their hunts to coincide with periods when prey animals were most likely to take risks. The territorial boundaries they established weren't just feeding grounds. They were carefully maintained hunting preserves where every environmental feature served a purpose. Fallen logs were positioned to create specific pathways. Dense vegetation was cultivated to provide optimal concealment. Water sources were monitored and sometimes even modified to ensure prey animals would have to venture into predetermined kill zones. Their reproductive strategies reflected the abundance of their world, but also its dangers. Giant arachnids invested enormous resources in protecting their young, creating nursery areas that were defended with a ferocity that suggests these creatures understood the value of the next generation. Fossil evidence indicates that some species built communal nurseries, sharing the burden of protecting their offspring in ways that speak to social complexity far beyond what we typically associate with arachnids. The mystery deepens when we examine the fossil evidence for tool use. Some giant arachnid sites contain arrangements of stones and debris that appear too purposeful to be accidental. These materials are positioned in patterns that would enhance hunting effectiveness, creating funnel-like structures that would direct prey movement, or barriers that would prevent escape once an attack had begun. Perhaps most remarkably, there's evidence suggesting that these creatures were capable of learning and adapting their hunting strategies based on the behavior of their prey. Sites that show repeated occupation over extended periods reveal evolving hunting methodologies, as if these giants were conducting experiments in predation and refining their techniques based on success rates. The intelligence implied by these discoveries forces us to reconsider our entire understanding of what these ancient worlds were like. These weren't simple ecosystems where larger creatures ate smaller ones in straightforward food chains. These were complex, dynamic environments where apex predators possessed cognitive capabilities sophisticated enough to plan, coordinate, and adapt their hunting strategies in real time. The true scope of their dominance becomes clear when we examine the fossil record for evidence of their prey. Bite marks on early reptile and amphibian remains show precise, calculated placement that speaks to anatomical knowledge. These predators understood exactly where to strike for maximum effectiveness. They weren't just killing to feed, they were demonstrating surgical precision that would be impressive in any era. This world belonged to them in ways that seem almost absolute by modern standards. They had claimed the forest floor as their domain, but their influence extended far beyond the ground level. Their presence shaped the behavior of every other creature in the ecosystem, creating ripple effects that influenced everything from plant distribution to water flow patterns to the very evolutionary paths their prey animals would follow. Into this realm of giants and architectural predators, our story introduces its most unlikely protagonists. Creatures so small and seemingly insignificant that their very survival seems like a cosmic accident. While eight-legged titans claimed dominion over cathedral forests, our ancestors huddled in the spaces between, living lives measured not in years or seasons, but in heartbeats survived and shadows successfully navigated. Your ancient relatives belonged to the early synapsids, primitive reptiles that carried within their modest bodies the first stirrings of what would eventually become mammalian life. Picture them accurately, and you might mistake them for lizards that had lost their way. Creatures no larger than house cats, but without the grace or confidence of modern felines. They possessed neither the sleek efficiency of reptiles nor the warm-blooded vigor of mammals. They were evolutionary experiments, caught between worlds, carrying the genetic potential for greatness while living the daily reality of being someone else's dinner. Their bodies told the story of creatures designed for hiding rather than fighting. Primitive scales covered skin that had no capacity for temperature regulation, leaving them dependent on external heat sources and vulnerable to the slightest climate fluctuations. They possessed no fur to provide insulation or camouflage, no thick hide to deflect attacks, no intimidating size to discourage predators. Their limbs were functional but unspecialized, adequate for basic locomotion but offering no particular advantage in speed, strength, or climbing ability. The neural architecture housed within their small skulls was equally modest. These weren't creatures capable of complex problem-solving or long-term planning. Their brains operated on immediate sensory input and instinctive responses, processing information just quickly enough to distinguish between food, danger, and potential mates. They had no language, no abstract thinking, no ability to learn from experiences beyond the most basic behavioral conditioning. Social structures among these early ancestors were virtually non-existent. Mating was a brief, seasonal affair driven entirely by hormonal imperatives. Parental care extended only long enough to ensure eggs were deposited in relatively safe locations. Beyond these basic reproductive necessities, our ancestors lived essentially solitary lives, each individual navigating the dangers of their world with only their own limited resources and instincts. Their survival toolkit was heartbreakingly simple. They had no tools, no fire, no constructed shelters, just the biological equipment they had inherited from their predecessors, refined slightly by whatever selective pressures they had managed to survive. Their primary defensive strategy was invisibility, achieved through careful movement patterns that avoided open spaces and predictable timing that kept them active during periods when major predators were less likely to be hunting. The daily reality of existence for these creatures reads like a manual for living under constant siege. Every moment spent foraging was a calculated gamble with death. Every venture from shelter a decision that could determine whether the genetic line continued or ended abruptly in someone else's digestive system. They had to balance the need for food against the omnipresent risk of becoming food, calculating odds that shifted with every environmental variable. Their foraging behavior reveals the desperate mathematics of survival in a predator-dominated world. Early synapsids developed feeding patterns that maximized caloric intake while minimizing exposure time. They learned to identify food sources that could be harvested quickly, often settling for nutritionally inferior options simply because they could be obtained and consumed without extended vulnerability to attack. The landscape itself had become their enemy in many ways. Every fallen log that might conceal nutritious insects could equally well harbor something with 8 legs and an appetite for small, warm-blooded creatures. Every dense patch of vegetation that offered concealment from aerial predators might contain web systems designed to turn shelter into trap. Even water sources, essential for survival, became killing grounds where thirsty animals were forced to expose themselves in open areas where arachnid ambush tactics proved most effective. Movement through this world required a kind of paranoid hypervigilance that modern humans can barely imagine. Our ancestors developed behavioral patterns that seem almost neurotic by contemporary standards, constantly checking shadows, freezing at the slightest unexpected sound, choosing routes based not on efficiency but on the availability of escape options at every step along the way. The size disparity between our ancestors and the giant arachnids wasn't just a matter of physical dimensions, it represented a fundamental imbalance in the evolutionary equation. Our ancestors were prey, pure and simple, living in a world where the basic architecture of the ecosystem had been designed around the needs and capabilities of creatures hundreds of times their size. They were field mice trying to survive in a landscape planned by wolves, refugees in their own evolutionary homeland. Fossil evidence from this period tells a story that's both heartbreaking and inspiring in its implications for mammalian tenacity. Bite marks preserved on early synapsid remains show the precise spacing and penetration depth characteristic of giant arachnid feeding. These aren't occasional opportunistic attacks. The frequency and distribution of such evidence suggests that our ancestors were regular items on the menu of multiple arachnid species. The bite patterns reveal hunting strategies that were both sophisticated and ruthlessly efficient. Giant arachnids targeted specific body regions that would immobilize prey quickly while preserving the maximum amount of usable meat. They understood anatomy in ways that speak to millions of years of experience with similar prey animals, developing techniques that minimized struggle and maximized feeding success. Some fossil assemblages tell even more detailed stories of these predator-prey interactions. We've discovered sites where multiple small synapsid individuals show evidence of having been killed and partially consumed in close proximity, suggesting that giant arachnids sometimes engaged in surplus killing, taking more prey than they could immediately consume, possibly as a response to seasonal abundance or as preparation for leaner periods. The preservation of these feeding sites offers glimpses into the behavioral patterns of both predator and prey. Scratch marks in ancient sediments show how our ancestors attempted to escape, revealing desperate digging behaviors and frantic attempts to burrow into substrates that might offer protection. The patterns suggest that even our most distant relatives understood the concept of seeking underground sanctuary when surface survival became impossible. This wasn't a story of David versus Goliath, where cleverness and determination could overcome raw physical advantage. This was a more brutal and honest dynamic. Field mice trying to outlast wolves in a game where the rules heavily favored size, strength, and predatory specialization. Our ancestors survived not through heroic confrontations, but through a combination of luck, reproductive prolificity, and an almost supernatural ability to make themselves invisible when visibility meant death. The central tension of this ancient drama lay in the mathematics of survival. Giant arachnids needed to kill regularly to sustain their massive metabolisms, but they didn't need to kill everything. Our ancestors needed to avoid being killed every single day of their lives, but they only needed to survive long enough to reproduce once or twice to keep their genetic line intact. It was a numbers game played across geological timescales, where success was measured not in individual survival, but in the persistence of bloodlines across millions of years. The psychological pressure of living under such constant threat began to shape the very architecture of early mammalian consciousness. Enhanced startle responses, hyperactive pattern recognition, obsessive attention to environmental details, all of these traits that would eventually become hallmarks of mammalian intelligence were first developed as responses to predation pressure from creatures so alien and efficient that they might as well have been designed by hostile extraterrestrial intelligence. Our ancestors learned to read the forest like a survival manual written in smells, sounds, and shadows. They developed memory systems capable of cataloging thousands of environmental details that might indicate safety or danger. They began to recognize the subtle signs that suggested an area had been recently visited by something large and hungry: broken vegetation, unusual scent combinations, the particular quality of silence that settles over spaces where predators have been active. The reproductive strategies that emerged during this period reflect the brutal realities of life in a predator-dominated world. Early synapsids began producing larger numbers of offspring, developing shorter gestation periods, and reaching sexual maturity at younger ages. Their entire life cycle became compressed and accelerated, designed to maximize the chances that at least some individuals from each generation would survive long enough to pass on their genes. These survival adaptations came at significant metabolic costs that would influence mammalian evolution for the next 300 million years. The constant state of alertness required enormous energy expenditure, forcing our ancestors to become extraordinarily efficient foragers capable of extracting maximum nutrition from minimal food sources. They developed digestive systems that could process low-quality food rapidly, allowing them to feed quickly and return to safety without extended exposure to predation risks. Beneath the quiet hills of central France, in the region once scarred by coal mining, lies a treasure trove that hums with the echoes of an age most of us can barely imagine. Monceau-les-Mines. To the casual traveller, it is just another town on the map, a landscape of stone houses and winding streets. Yet deep beneath its soil, locked within layers of shale, lies a theatre of predators and prey frozen in the middle of their endless struggle. These rocks, more than 305 million years old, preserve not just bones and shells, but moments of conflict, the raw traces of survival etched into stone. When the light of the lab lamps falls across the slabs, it is as though the earth itself whispers the memories of ancient battlegrounds. The fossils here do not present a tidy picture. They are fractured, partial, sometimes as faint as shadows smudged in clay. But when pieced together, they tell us that this was no gentle forest. These swamps rang with the rustle of colossal wings, the ripple of armoured millipedes, and the stealth of arachnids large enough to command silence with their passing. In Monceau, we encounter more than relics. We encounter the ghosts of hunters and the trembling paths of those who fled them. Every trackway, every scratch across fossilized mud is a sentence in a story that predates mammals, predates birds, predates nearly everything we recognize today. Among these silent storytellers lies a creature that refuses easy classification, id monarachni brasieri. It is called the almost spider, and the name itself feels like a riddle. Neither quite the scuttling predator of modern nightmares nor the armoured scorpion of the seas that came before, it sits in between, an evolutionary hinge caught in stone. Its body reveals secrets of transition. It bore fangs but lacked spinnerets, possessed strong legs but not the delicate architecture of true webs. It is a creature standing on the threshold of a great lineage, its anatomy whispering of futures it would never see. When its imprints were uncovered, scientists leaned in close, knowing they were not just looking at a fossil but at a missing page, a half-written line in the story of arachnids. This almost spider speaks to a world of predators adapting in real time, testing designs that would echo through deep time. To imagine Idmonarachne alive is to picture a hunter crouched on the soft earth of Monceau's swamps, waiting for a tremor, for the vibration of something small moving through the undergrowth. No web was needed. Patience was weapon enough. Its descendants would spin silk strong enough to bridge branches. But here in this shadow age, survival was measured not in threads, but in timing. The Monceau deposits give us not only the bones of the hunter, but the very soil it pressed against. A theatre seat frozen mid-performance, waiting for us to lean in and listen. Far across the ocean, on another continent, another stage holds the memory of giants. In the rugged lands of Argentina lies the Bajo de Veliz formation, where stone hills rise like broken teeth against the horizon. Here, long before there were birds to circle above or mammals to scurry below, the earth sealed away the colossal frame of a creature that once defined fear itself, Megarachne. For years, paleontologists believed this fossil represented the largest true spider ever to walk the land, a beast with a body the length of a man's arm and legs that could stretch as wide as his reach. The very thought sent shivers racing down spines. Later, deeper studies revealed that Megarachne was not a spider in the modern sense, but a close cousin, an aquatic predator from the lineage of sea scorpions, adapted for life on land. Yet the terror remained. For whatever classification we give it, the fossil whispers the same truth. This was no creature to be dismissed. The rocks of Bajo de Veliz preserve more than skeletons. They preserve entire ecosystems, compressed forests of plants, the ripple of waterlogged soils, even hints of what might have been the last meals of long-dead beasts. In this frozen ecosystem, Megarachne does not stand alone. Surrounding it are traces of its world, the impressions of ferns taller than houses, the faint outlines of amphibians caught in sediment as though fleeing something unseen. These stones hold the afterimage of lives interrupted. When scientists placed the fragments under CT scanners, the hidden architecture of its armor came into view, and with it, the suspicion that this predator's power was not simply brute strength, but a cunning adaptability. Travel again, this time north, to the heart of Illinois, where a river once meandered lazily across a landscape thick with vegetation. Here lies the Mazon Creek fossil beds, one of the most astonishing windows into the Carboniferous. Unlike most fossil sites where bones lie scattered and incomplete, Mazon Creek preserves entire forms within nodules of ironstone. These nodules, cracked open carefully by patient hands, reveal not broken fragments, but whole creatures. The outline of a fish, the delicate frond of a fern, the exoskeleton of an insect still poised as if ready to leap. It is as if the swamp had breathed in, held the moment, and never exhaled again. From these nodules emerge snapshots of predator and prey alike. There are imprints of arachnids waiting beneath leaves, insects trapped mid-motion, and amphibians locked in their final sprawl. In one nodule, the curled body of a creature rests inside the ribcage of another, stomach contents frozen forever, betraying the last meal consumed before death sealed both in stone. In others, faint depressions stretch across the rock, trackways that wind and twist, the footprints of arachnids in pursuit, the hurried scramble of smaller animals fleeing into the dark. These traces are more than curiosities. They are evidence of a world locked in constant pursuit, the script of the hunt written in mud and sealed in iron. When you read these trackways, you realize they are not abstract symbols, but living movements. Each curve of a claw mark tells us the weight of the creature, the speed of its step. The widening gap between impressions speaks of a sudden burst of speed, a chase breaking loose. Sometimes the trackways end abruptly, vanishing into nothing, as though the hunter leapt and the prey's story ended right there, swallowed before it could leave another mark. It is in these silences, these vanishings, that the fossils speak loudest, telling us of ambushes successful and escapes cut short. Modern technology has given us a way to listen more closely to these whispers. CT scanning, with its ability to peel back layers of stone without destroying the fossil, has allowed researchers to reconstruct bodies in 3 dimensions, to see not just the flat impression, but the curvature of armor plates, the depth of fang sockets, the pathways of veins etched in chitin. 3-dimensional modeling has taken these reconstructions further, animating them with hypotheses of movement. Imagine a scientist adjusting the angle of a digital limb, watching how the joints articulate, testing whether a creature crouched before springing or strode with long predatory steps. Each model breathes a little life back into what was lost, not speculation without foundation, but inference drawn from stone itself. Through these technologies, we glimpse behaviors that fossils alone could never fully show. We see how an arachnid might have raised its forelimbs before striking, how vibrations in the ground could have guided its movements, how its body mass dictated the efficiency of a pursuit. Fossilized stomach contents confirm what prey was taken, trackways confirm how it was stalked. Together they assemble into a grim choreography, one that unfolded again and again across continents. Each slab of stone becomes not just an artifact, but a page of testimony, describing a world where our ancestors learned fear in its rawest form. From Monceau's almost spider to Bajo de Veliz's armored giant to the frozen vignettes of Mazon Creek, the earth has kept these memories in silence until we were ready to hear them. Now, as we place them under scanners, peer through microscopes, and spin their forms into digital light, the silence stirs and the whispers grow louder. What they tell us is not of peace, not of gentle coexistence, but of an age when hunters ruled without question and survival meant mastering the art of avoidance. The battlegrounds are still there, sealed beneath stone, waiting for us to listen more closely. Just as we lean into these whispers, the story of these creatures demands that we look not only at where they walked, but at how they lived within their own bodies. For their power was not only in their presence on the land, but in the machinery of their anatomy, the very architecture that made them nightmares come alive. Their dominance was not carved from brute size alone, but from an arsenal built into their very bodies, honed by hundreds of millions of years of evolutionary refinement. To stand before one of these ancient arachnid predators, had we been there to witness it, would not have been to see a simple beast, but to confront a machine designed by nature with terrifying precision. Each piece of their anatomy, from the way they saw to the way they struck, tells us why the forest floor of the Carboniferous was a kingdom where 8 legs dictated the rules. Begin with the eyes. To modern humans, vision is central, but to these creatures, vision was a panorama of possibility. Imagine standing in a clearing as light filters down through cathedral-sized ferns. Somewhere in that green haze, 8 unblinking eyes fix upon you. Arranged across a domed head, their placement gave the predator a near-complete field of view, each lens capturing slivers of movement, shadows shifting, tremors of life brushing against the edges of perception. While we blink and refocus, their eyes needed no pause, no adjustment, always ready, always hunting. Some lenses were tuned for distance, others for the faintest twitch in the undergrowth, for a small synapsid creeping through the ferns. This meant there was no safe angle of approach. The arachnid's gaze was a net thrown wide, catching motion from every direction. But vision was only the first line of awareness. Across their legs bristled arrays of hairs, each one a sensor more delicate than any device we have built. These hairs could register vibrations in the ground so subtle they would escape human perception entirely. A beetle shifting beneath leaf litter, the soft scrape of claws on bark, even the heartbeat of a panicked mammal-sized ancestor, all of it translated into signals running through those sensory threads. To stand still was not safety, because the pressure of lungs drawing breath, the faintest stir of a chest rising and falling, sent ripples into the soil. These hunters listened with their bodies, mapping their world in tremors. If we compare their legs to seismographs, it would be a poor comparison, for the arachnids were more sensitive still, reading the earth's whispers with the precision of life or death necessity. Once the prey was detected, movement followed, powered not by the push and pull of muscles alone, but by a hydraulic system, unlike anything in our mammalian frame. Their legs were not simple bones hinged with sinew. They were pistons, driven by internal blood pressure, able to extend with a sudden burst of force that could launch them across the forest floor. Each step was not just motion, but the release of pressurized energy, a living machine operating on principles engineers would later envy. When a predator lunged, it was not a slow heave of mass, but an eruption, legs unfolding in perfect synchronization, carrying the armored body with startling acceleration. To witness it would have been to see a blur, a ripple of movement where one moment there was stillness and the next a shadow leapt forward. Waiting at the front of that armored body were the weapons that defined terror. The chelicerae. These were not delicate needles like those of smaller spiders today. They were fangs on a scale so large they might be compared to railroad spikes, heavy, ridged, and driven with crushing force. Some species may have injected venom through them, delivering a chemical weapon to paralyze or liquefy tissue. Others relied on sheer mechanical strength, driving those fangs into flesh and bone with enough pressure to rupture muscle and snap cartilage. Imagine the jaws of a wolf and the grip of a vice combined, then set at the end of an arachnid's armored face. To prey that weighed no more than a cat, resistance was meaningless. The strike of the chelicerae was not simply an attack, it was a verdict. Their ability to reach such immense size, far beyond the limits of most modern arthropods, depended on the peculiar architecture of their respiratory systems. Within their bodies, layered stacks of tissue called book lungs spread like the pages of a manuscript, each fold providing an enormous surface area for oxygen exchange. In today's world, With its 21% oxygen, such lungs impose strict limits. But in the Carboniferous, with its air so rich in oxygen that sparks could ignite forests, these lungs operated at full capacity. They drew in the thick atmosphere, flooding their bodies with life-giving gas, fueling size and activity levels that would otherwise collapse under the burden of inefficiency. Where smaller arthropods today suffocate if they grow too large, the giants of this era breathed with ease, their physiology aligned perfectly with an atmosphere that invited monstrosity. Wrapped around this machinery was an exoskeleton of remarkable engineering. Chitin, the same material that makes up the shells of crabs and the wings of beetles, formed plates that locked together like armor. Yet this armor was not the heavy, sluggish casing we might imagine. It was lightweight but resilient, offering protection from predators while still allowing speed and agility. Striking it would be like hitting layered composite material, rigid enough to deflect attacks but flexible enough to absorb shocks. The polished sheen of this armor must have glistened in the dim light of the forest floor, a shifting carapace that announced both power and menace. Within the exoskeleton, muscles anchored to interior ridges pulled against the plates, combining with hydraulics to produce movement both precise and explosive. To any small creature daring enough to fight back, the armor was proof that no blow would land deep enough to matter. Some of these predators carried an additional advantage, one that transformed the forest itself into their hunting ground: silk. Not every giant arachnid could spin, but those that did redefined the meaning of ambush. Their silk was not the fragile thread we brush from corners today, but cables of astonishing strength, capable of anchoring branches or spanning gaps between tree trunks. Imagine walking beneath the towering ferns, only to find a web suspended like a vast net, each strand thick as twine, glistening with dew. For an unwary synapsid, one brush against the adhesive threads meant entanglement, every struggle pulling the body deeper into the trap. The predator, alerted by vibrations running through the web like music down a string, would approach with calculated certainty. Once within reach, the Chalicorae finished the work, and the forest claimed another meal. These webs were not limited to simple snares. Some may have created three-dimensional hunting grounds, scaffolds of silk interlaced with vegetation, turning entire patches of the swamp into cages, invisible until it was too late. In such spaces, movement itself became dangerous. Every direction risked entrapment. The hunter, perched at the center or concealed at the edge, was connected by threads of tension to every corner of its domain. No sound, no tremor, no ripple in the silk escaped detection. The forest was alive with traps, silent until sprung, then final in their verdict. When we reconstruct these predators from stone and inference, it is not enough to think of them as oversized spiders. They were engines of survival, organisms perfectly adapted to their place and time. Every sense, every limb, every plate of armor was tuned to exploit an environment where prey was abundant and danger was constant. They were nightmares with bodies to match, not imagined horrors, but the logical outcome of nature given oxygen and time. As we step deeper into their story, it becomes clear that their biology was only the foundation. The true measure of their reign was not in the structure of their bodies, but in how they used them. In the strategies, the tactics, the behaviors that transformed anatomy into dominance. To understand the terror they cast across the Carboniferous, we must now follow them into the forests and swamps, where their senses and weapons became part of a play more dreadful than anatomy alone can explain. The monsters of the Carboniferous did not emerge from chance alone. Their size, their strength, their uncanny dominance was born from the very air they breathed. To walk through those ancient forests would have been to inhale a substance thicker, richer, and far more combustible than the atmosphere we know today. Oxygen saturated the world at levels modern lungs would find overwhelming. 35% of the air compared to the 21% that fills our skies now. It was an invisible tide, an unseen abundance that rewrote the rules of evolution. This revolution began quietly, with plants. Early vascular trees, vast lycophytes and horsetails rising 100 feet toward the canopy, drew in carbon dioxide and exhaled oxygen in volumes the Earth had never seen before. The cycle was relentless, unspooling over millions of years, each breath of the forests pumping more oxygen into the skies. Coal swamps spread across continents, entire landscapes of green factories working without pause, converting sunlight and atmosphere into fuel for life. The air grew dense, charged with vitality, and with it came possibilities that would have been unthinkable in leaner ages. For arthropods, the abundance was liberation. Their bodies, limited by diffusion, could suddenly grow to sizes far beyond their modern kin. Insects with wings wide enough to shade a person soared through the trees. Millipedes longer than a man stretched across the forest floor, and arachnids became titans in their own right. Where oxygen flows plentifully, respiratory systems function with greater efficiency, and size becomes not a burden, but an advantage. Gigantism was not an accident, it was an inevitability. Evolution seized the opportunity, building predators and prey alike on scales no smaller world could support. Yet the oxygen did more than inflate size. It stoked the fires of metabolism, driving activity and aggression to heights unknown. With every cell saturated in fuel, movement became quicker, reactions sharper, hunts more relentless. These were not sluggish giants dragging their weight across the swamps, but restless predators charged with energy, their very blood coursing with the capacity for violence. The link between oxygen and activity is clear even in the modern world. Higher oxygen availability sharpens performance, drives endurance, pushes organisms into states of greater alertness. In the Carboniferous, this principle was written into every breath, turning the forest into a stage where everything moved faster, hunted harder, and fought longer. But this abundance was double-edged. The very richness that gave life its monstrous scale also turned the earth into a tinderbox. At 35% oxygen, a fallen branch struck by lightning, or even the friction of dry leaves, could ignite with terrifying ease. Forests burned often and ferociously, flames racing through fern canopies and reducing entire landscapes to ash. Yet fire did not end the forests, it renewed them. The coal swamps, resilient and fecund, regrew quickly, their oxygen pumps restarting as soon as shoots pushed through charred soil. It was a planet constantly reborn, the air always thick with potential, the ground always seeded with new growth. For the creatures living there, fire was as common as rain, another rhythm in the endless cycle of creation and destruction. Amid this backdrop of plenty, the evolutionary arms race intensified. Prey, no longer safe in smallness, responded by growing larger themselves, using mass as a shield against predators. To bite into a body thick with muscle required greater force, and so predators grew larger still, their chelicerae expanding in size and power to overcome the defenses. Each adaptation sparked another, a spiral of escalation powered by the atmosphere itself. To survive meant keeping pace, matching growth with growth, cunning with cunning. In this relentless game, our ancestors found themselves squeezed by both sides. Too small to resist, too conspicuous to escape, forced into strategies of stealth and concealment that would shape their lineages forever. Picture the forest floor in this age of abundance. A small synapsid emerges from its burrow at dusk, the air around it charged with oxygen so dense it feels alive. Insects trill at volumes deafening to sensitive ears, their wings buzzing with the energy of accelerated metabolisms. Above, dragonflies the size of hawks patrol the canopy, their compound eyes reflecting moonlight. From the shadows, arachnids stir, their bodies armored, their movements sudden, their senses sharpened to a razor's edge by the very air filling their lungs. Every breath the synapsid takes fuels its body, but it fuels its predators just as well. Survival in this place is not simply about hiding, it is about navigating an atmosphere that has turned every creature into a potential titan. The paradox becomes clear. The air that gave rise to monsters also set the stage for their downfall. For all its richness, such an atmosphere was unsustainable. Fire consumed too much, forests fluctuated with climate shifts, and the balance of gases could not hold steady forever. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, the oxygen tide began to ebb. The world that had once favoured gigantism began to turn hostile to it. Each decrease in oxygen concentration strained the systems of the great arthropods, their book lungs no longer able to flood massive bodies with enough fuel. Where once they had thrived, now they struggled, their size turning from strength to liability. Yet, in the Carboniferous prime, none of this was apparent. The predators reigned as if forever, their dominance supported by air itself. Their bodies were blueprints of abundance, their behaviors written by the excess energy coursing through their veins. To live in that age was to know monsters not only in flesh but in principle, for the world itself had conspired to build them, to test the limits of what life could achieve when atmosphere becomes overgenerous. The stage was set, the conditions aligned, the forest alive with oversized ambition. What remained was to see how these creatures, fueled by abundance, wielded their power, how they stalked, ambushed, and pursued with the weapons their world had gifted them. Predators built for abundance were not passive wanderers. They turned their extraordinary anatomy into weapons of strategy, bending the forest itself into an accomplice. To imagine their hunts is to step into a world where every shadow might conceal intent, where silence was never empty but charged with menace. The Carboniferous was not just alive with giants, it was alive with the methods those giants devised to feed. Begin with the ambush. Fallen logs, rotting trunks, and thickets of ferns provided more than cover for small creatures. For the arachnid giants, these structures became blinds. A predator the size of a table could nestle against a collapsed tree, its body pressed flat, armored carapace blending with bark and leaf mold. From a distance, it appeared as nothing more than another fragment of the swamp's debris. Yet beneath that stillness, hydraulic legs coiled like springs. Vibrations traced through the soil, hairs quivered, and the arachnid waited. When a synapsid nosed close, sniffing for insects beneath the same log, the hunter erupted. Legs unfolded in a single surge, fangs descended, and the log itself became a stage for violence. The speed of the strike was decisive. Prey rarely had time to cry out before venom or crushing force ended the attempt at flight. Not every strategy relied on stealth at ground level. Some of these creatures weaponized the air between trees. Imagine silk stretched not in a single spiral, but in vast architectural networks, threads anchored to trunks as thick as towers. These webs, glistening in the humidity, spanned meters of open space, lattices strong enough to snare animals far larger than insects. The prey caught in such snares was not merely stuck, it was broadcast. Each thrash, each desperate attempt to break free, sent vibrations racing through the silk, carrying the signal to the waiting predator. For the hunter perched at the margin, every tremor was a map of panic, guiding its approach with mathematical precision. The web was not a trap alone. It was an extension of the predator's senses, a nervous system stretching across the forest, tuned to the music of fear. Some reconstructions suggest that these webs could form aerial corridors, a kind of invisible fencework channeling smaller creatures into kill zones. To walk through such a forest would have been to navigate a maze of silken barriers, unseen until contact was made, every path narrowed by threads that promised entanglement. To predators, this was territory made tangible, hunting grounds engineered strand by strand. Few environments in Earth's history have been so actively sculpted by hunters themselves, turning raw space into predatory architecture. Evidence from fossil trackways tells us there was more to their hunts than solitary ambush. In some regions, parallel lines of footprints, preserved in mudstone, suggest coordinated movement. The idea that arachnids could hunt in groups unsettles expectations. Modern spiders, by and large, are solitary killers, their interactions limited to mating or cannibalism. Yet here, in the Carboniferous, we see hints of something else. Individuals moving in tandem, strides matching, paths converging on the same points. Whether this was true pack hunting or a loose aggregation drawn by prey scent is uncertain, but the possibility remains that some species engaged in cooperative strategies. A coordinated strike by multiple arachnids would have been devastating, leaving prey with no direction of escape. To watch such a hunt would have been to witness choreography. One predator shifts to the flank, while another blocks retreat. Their movements are not random but complementary, the sum of instincts refined by generations of success. When the prey lunges toward safety, another ambusher springs from concealment, closing the path. In this theatre of entrapment, there was no need for words or planning. The environment itself became the script, and the arachnids, the actors who knew their roles by blood and bone. The moment of the kill was swift and merciless. The first contact came with a strike of fangs, either piercing deep to inject venom or crushing through the outer defenses of flesh. For those species armed with chemical weaponry, the venom worked quickly, paralyzing muscles, freezing escape in mid-motion. The victim, still alive, would be immobilized as digestive enzymes began their work, liquefying tissue into a meal that could be consumed without tearing. For species that relied on sheer force, the fangs became pincers, breaking bones, rupturing organs, ensuring death by mechanical certainty. Often, both methods worked in concert, venom to immobilize, crushing power to finish. The efficiency of this process left little doubt that these predators were apex by design. Territory was not a matter of chance, but a resource to be claimed and defended. These arachnids needed vast spaces to sustain their size, and evidence suggests they marked their ranges with both scent and silk. Chemical signals, imperceptible to us but pungent in their world, would have lingered along pathways, announcing ownership. Strands of silk strung across travel routes may have served not only as hunting tools but as warnings to rivals. This ground is taken, this forest already spoken for. The density of the Carboniferous swamps meant constant competition, but within these signals, boundaries emerged, invisible maps dictating where each predator reigned. Such territoriality shaped the rhythm of the forest. To wander into the range of a giant arachnid was to trespass into danger, and smaller creatures learned to skirt the edges of these invisible borders. For our ancestors, memory became survival, remembering where the air smelled of silk, where the ground bore the scratches of claws, where silence carried the weight of something watching. The forest was not neutral, it was partitioned into fiefdoms, each controlled by a hunter that enforced its rule with violence. Speculation persists that some of these giants developed primitive communication to coordinate their hunts. Fossil evidence hints at interactions beyond mere chance, patterns in trackways that overlap, pauses in movement that align as if waiting. If true, this suggests that vibrations transmitted through the ground, or even through shared silk threads, could have conveyed intent. Imagine a ripple running down a line of silk, one predator alerting another to movement detected nearby. Such signals would not require language, only instinct, the shared grammar of hunger. If coordination of this kind existed, it would make these arachnids not only formidable in size and strength, but terrifying in intelligence. To reconstruct their hunting strategies is to understand why small creatures burrowed, why they evolved to move under the cover of night, why the forest floor itself became a labyrinth of hiding places. Every adaptation of our ancestors can be read as an answer to the relentless pursuit of these giants. The swamps were alive with more than plants and insects. They were alive with tactics, each predator bending environment and physiology into weapons. Yet strategy, no matter how perfected, always shapes its counterpart. As predators refined their methods, prey refined their evasions. The dance of pursuit and escape was relentless, its pressure carving the future of evolution itself. To grasp how our ancestors survived in the face of such predation, we must step away from the hunters and follow the hunted into their own desperate inventions. Survival was never about strength alone. In a world where the canopy bristled with traps and the forest floor belonged to hunters bristling with fangs, survival meant vanishing. Our earliest ancestors learned that the only safe path was downward, into the earth itself. Burrows became fortresses, escape hatches and nurseries. Tunnels threaded beneath the death zones of the swamp, carving a hidden world parallel to the one dominated by giants. For creatures scarcely larger than a hand, digging meant the difference between lineage and extinction. The burrowing revolution rewrote the rules of existence. Clawed forelimbs, once tools for grasping food, grew sturdier, shaped by generations into digging machines. Soft loam and damp clay yielded beneath the persistence of tiny bodies, creating labyrinths of shelter. Each chamber was a barricade against fangs that could not follow underground. The air there was cooler, still, carrying the damp mineral scent of stone and roots rather than the musk of predators. In those confined tunnels, safety had a cost. Constant vigilance, the patience to wait, and the acceptance of darkness as a permanent companion. The dark demanded its own gifts. As eyes dimmed by lack of sunlight narrowed their usefulness, other senses grew keener. Hearing stretched outward, sensitive to the faintest scrape above the surface, the tremor of a step that might mean doom. Smell, once a tool for finding food, became a warning system, a radar for the musk of predators or the scent of kin. Even in the pitch of night, some lineages retained vision adapted to dimness, their retinas wide, absorbing what little glow seeped between trees or stars. Nocturnality was not a choice, but a necessity. To emerge in daylight meant being seen, being hunted, being devoured. But to creep in shadow was to survive. The night, once the domain of silence, became a new theatre where small mammals lived by stealth. Size itself became a weapon of survival, though a fragile one. Remaining small meant slipping unnoticed into crevices, vanishing beneath leaves, or vanishing entirely underground. Yet smallness came at a price. Tiny stomachs demanded constant filling, and the search for food carried its own risks. Every venture to the surface was a gamble, hunger against death. Some lineages balanced precariously on the edge of starvation, their very existence a tightrope act between being too small to be noticed and too frail to endure. For those who could not rely on solitude, survival turned communal. Fossil evidence hints at group huddling within burrows, bodies pressed together not only for warmth but for mutual protection. Together they could share vigilance, each member a sentinel in turn. Some may have developed rudimentary warning systems, sharp squeals at the hint of vibrations, sudden retreats triggered by one sensing what the others missed. To live in groups meant distributing fear, turning many pairs of ears and noses into a living alarm system. Survival split into two divergent strategies, both born of the same terror. Some became runners, creatures of speed. Long hind limbs evolved for sudden bursts, launching them across leaf litter in desperate sprints. Their strategy was risk incarnate, gambling that they could outpace the strike of a predator long enough to vanish into cover. Others chose the path of stillness. Hiders specialized in silence, in flattening themselves against stone or soil, vanishing within moments of danger. To move was to invite pursuit, to vanish was to evade it. Across countless generations, this division carved new forms of mammalian development, refining bodies for two modes of survival, the blur of escape and the silence of concealment. These strategies left traces not just in bones, but in behaviors that echo across time. Even today, in the reflexes of living mammals, the whispers of those ancient terrors remain. The startle reflex, the sudden jolt of muscle at an unexpected sound, was forged in the shadows of the Carboniferous. Fear responses, the surge of adrenaline that tightens the chest and floods the body with urgency, was sculpted by the necessity of instant decision: run, hide, or perish. To this day, the rustle in the grass, the snap of a twig, can send a pulse of inherited panic through our veins. The predators are long gone, but their memory remains in our very nerves. Every strategy our ancestors adopted carved them deeper into survival. The tunnels beneath the swamp became highways of refuge, branching routes of escape that predators could never follow. Nocturnal life sharpened senses into instruments of survival, turning darkness into an ally rather than a prison. Communal life ensured that no single creature bore the full weight of vigilance. Each adaptation layered upon the last, forming a living barricade against extinction. Yet these strategies did more than preserve life. They forged new possibilities. In the damp chambers beneath roots, in the silent watch of the night, in the huddled warmth of kin, the first sparks of what would one day define mammals were taking shape. Every burrow dug, every eye turned to the night sky, every reflex sharpened by fear was a step along a hidden path, one that led not only to survival, but to dominance in ages yet to come. Still, even the most carefully laid refuge was never absolute. Safety underground could not last forever. The world above remained in constant flux, forests burning under an oxygen-rich sky, predators evolving new tactics, the climate itself shifting beneath the weight of geological change. Burrows offered reprieve, not permanence. To truly endure, our ancestors would have to face the upheavals yet to come, crises written not only in tooth and claw, but in fire, flood, and stone. The night has barely retreated when the swamp stirs. A grey dawn seeps through the canopy, its light fractured by towering ferns and tree-sized horsetails. Mist clings low to the ground, curling through roots and pooling over black water. Each sound is amplified in the stillness, the drip of condensation from leaves, the plop of something unseen slipping into a pool, the crack of a distant branch under the weight of a moving body. In this world, every noise carries a question. Is it the approach of prey, or the whisper of death drawing near? From a hidden burrow, a family group of early synapsids emerges. Their bodies are small, low to the ground, sleek with fur that catches the moisture of the morning. The eldest leads, pausing with every few steps, ears swiveling at the faintest tremor. Behind, juveniles scurry nervously, pressing close to their parents' flanks. Their goal is water, a necessity even in this damp world, but every stride toward the swamp's edge is measured against the risk of ambush. Above, in the canopy, shadows stir. Giant arachnids wait among the trunks and foliage. Their legs grip bark with silent precision, claws hooking into grooves invisible from below. 8 eyes survey the swamp from different angles, each capturing slivers of movement that, pieced together, form a near-complete panorama of the ground below. Hairs on their limbs register the faintest vibration of air displaced by movement. To the synapsids, the forest whispers. To the hunters, it speaks in complete sentences. The synapsids creep forward, noses twitching, sifting air for warning scents. This is sensory warfare at its most primal, prey sharpening their perception to anticipate danger, predators perfecting silence to erase any sign of their approach. One survival system listens for sound so faint it borders on silence itself, while the other perfects a way of moving that leaves no sound at all. A battle of adaptations fought not with claws or teeth, but with stillness and awareness. Camouflage deepens the arms race. The arachnids' bodies mirror the texture of bark, their segmented limbs lined with ridges that mimic vines and lichen. Some carry shades of greenish-brown, blurring into the canopy's gloom. From below, they appear as nothing more than part of the forest itself: twisted wood, dark knots, patches of moss. Meanwhile, the synapsids' fur patterns echo the dappled light, breaking their outlines into shifting shadows as they slip between roots. Predator and prey exist in a world of deception, each perfecting the art of vanishing from the other's eye. The leading synapsid pauses near a cluster of fallen logs, lifting its head as though memorizing the terrain. The young copy the behavior, their eyes scanning the ground as if reading it for hidden meaning. This mapping of escape routes is instinct made flesh, an unspoken calculus where every hollow trunk, every thicket, every shadow becomes a possible refuge or death trap. In this killing field, memory is survival. Knowing the exact distance to safety, knowing which root system offers a tunnel beneath it, can mean the difference between a bloodline continuing or ending in silence. Above, one arachnid stirs. It shifts its weight incrementally, preparing for descent. Its strategy is not a blind strike. It has already calculated the ground below, measured the pathways of retreat, and chosen the weakest of the group. Its movements are deliberate, patient, silent. But not all hunts begin with sudden violence. Some arachnids favored a different method, one that stretched terror into endurance. Rather than the flash of ambush, they specialized in the persistence hunt, a relentless pursuit that wore prey down through sheer exhaustion. Imagine the swamp alive with motion, a synapsid fleeing through thickets and across flooded ground, every bound carrying it closer to the hope of escape. Behind, the arachnid follows, not with bursts of speed, but with unwavering determination. It clambers over logs, threads through reeds, always advancing, never breaking rhythm. Hours may pass, the predator trailing the prey at a distance, each step sapping strength. The synapsid's lungs burn, its limbs falter, until finally exhaustion breaks it long before fangs ever touch flesh. This was terror stretched across time, the slow suffocation of hope itself. Yet not all hunts ended in favor of the predator. The synapsids were not passive victims. Generations had sharpened their survival strategies to a razor's edge. When an ambush failed, when an arachnid lunged and missed, the family group scattered with a precision born of practice. Some bolted toward burrows memorized from countless patrols. Others froze, vanishing into leaf litter, their stillness so complete they became indistinguishable from the forest floor. Still others darted into water, bodies skimming its surface before vanishing beneath lily-like pads. Every strategy bore the weight of trial and error, every move the residue of ancestors who had either succeeded or perished. In the misty dawn of the Carboniferous, predator and prey did more than clash. They sculpted one another. Silent hunters forced the evolution of keener ears. Relentless pursuit demanded quicker bursts of speed and sharper terrain memory. Camouflage provoked mimicry in return, until the forest became a theater of illusions where nothing could be trusted at first glance. Each adaptation was both weapon and shield, each countermeasure driving the other side to evolve further. The killing fields were not only about death. They were crucibles of transformation, shaping creatures into forms that would echo through millions of years. Every dawn, every hunt, every near escape inscribed its lesson into flesh, blood, and bone. In those exchanges of fear and violence, the groundwork of mammalian survival strategies and arachnid dominance alike was forged. Yet the swamp's mist never cleared completely. Beyond each narrow survival lay new pressures, new hunters, new challenges. The killing fields were only one chapter of a larger struggle, a struggle that would not remain confined to forest floors or burrows, but would soon be rewritten by the shifting breath of the planet itself. The Carboniferous forest was not a flat stage, but a towering labyrinth, a vertical world divided into layers of survival. At the top, The canopy stretched like a living ceiling of giant ferns and seed-bearing trees, blotting out much of the sun. Between the trunks, a mid-level world of vines, mosses, and suspended debris formed a dense curtain of shadows. At the bottom, where damp earth met stagnant pools, the forest floor lay in perpetual twilight. Each level held its own predators, its own prey, and its own rules. The giants of 8 legs were masters of the ground. Their size limited their reach into the canopy, but beneath the trees they ruled with authority. Between roots that twisted like walls, they prowled in silence, their legs spanning gaps that smaller hunters could not cross. Fallen logs became ambush platforms, while leaf litter turned into camouflage. Yet they did not reign alone. The forest floor was crowded with other claimants, each vying for territory, each testing the balance of dominance. Massive millipedes, armored in chitin plates, stretched several meters as they rolled slowly across the terrain. Their bulk carried safety, but their sheer numbers drew the attention of predators. Early reptiles, nimble and experimental in design, darted from one patch of cover to another, their scales shimmering in faint colors that blended with bark and mud. Amphibians, larger than any that exist today, lingered near water edges, their slick bodies poised for sudden lunges at anything small enough to swallow whole. The floor was a chessboard of giants and contenders, with no permanent victor, only temporary advantage. Resource competition shaped every move. Giant arachnids did not only hunt, they defended hunting rights against others who sought the same prey. Millipedes devoured decaying plant matter in such quantities that they altered the undergrowth, stripping away shelter that smaller creatures might otherwise use to hide. Reptiles snatched insects and small vertebrates, narrowing the options for mammal ancestors. Amphibians claimed the pools where life gathered, cutting off access to vital water. The result was not a hierarchy of peace, but a tangle of overlapping hungers, each pressuring the others in a constant struggle for dominance. In such a web, our ancestors barely registered above the insects. Small, shivering, vulnerable, they scraped survival from what remained at the edges of the food chain. They scavenged fallen insect husks, hunted invertebrates too insignificant for larger predators to notice, and fed on seeds that dropped from above. To live meant to remain invisible, to avoid the attention of creatures whose hunger could erase them in seconds. In this hierarchy, even a careless rustle could be fatal, a brief misstep that turned a forager into a meal. The complexity of the Carboniferous food web stretched beyond simple predator and prey. It operated in cycles shaped by the rhythm of seasons. Wet periods swelled the swamps, bringing explosions of insect life and opportunities for small hunters to feast. Dry stretches shrank the pools, forcing amphibians and their predators into tighter quarters where competition grew violent. For the arachnids, these cycles dictated strategy. During times of abundance, they could afford patience, waiting for prey to wander into their grasp. During scarcity, their range expanded, their hunts lengthened, and their hunger drove them to riskier confrontations. Seasonal variation was not merely a matter of weather. Over millions of years, the climate shifted in long arcs, altering the balance of forest life. Some stretches brought wetter, warmer ages where vegetation grew unchecked, creating vast jungles thick with opportunity. Other times, cooler or drier intervals fractured those jungles into scattered refuges, compressing predator and prey into contested spaces. In each swing, strategies adapted, honed by necessity, tested against extinction. Those who failed to adjust vanished into the fossil record, their absence carved into stone as a reminder of how fragile dominance could be. Volcanic upheavals and rising seas deepened the fragmentation. Lava flows cut through forests, burning swaths of territory to ash before life reclaimed them. Shifting shorelines drowned valleys and swamps, isolating survivors on higher ground. Each disruption broke the continuity of the great jungles, leaving behind pockets of life trapped in islands of survival. In these refuges, predators and prey redefined their battles, each pocket evolving slightly differently. One forest might favor speed, another stealth, another sheer endurance. What arose from these isolated crucibles was diversity, carved by catastrophe into countless forms. The forest floor, for all its danger, mirrored something familiar. Its tangled web of predators resembled modern ecosystems where apex hunters dictate balance. Just as the arachnids shaped the behavior of synapsids, today's lions, wolves, or crocodiles enforce survival strategies among prey. Just as amphibians and reptiles of the Carboniferous competed for space at water's edge, so too do hippos, alligators, and fish contend for territory in modern wetlands. The echoes are unmistakable. Dominance breeds adaptation, adaptation drives counter-strategy, and balance is maintained only through constant pressure. Even the concept of territory, so central to the giants of the forest floor, resonates today. The silk strands stretched across hunting grounds, the chemical markers pressed into bark or soil, were declarations of ownership no less significant than the scent markings of tigers or the patrol calls of wolves. Predators, ancient or modern, are not only hunters but managers of space, shaping the behavior of everything that lives within their reach. The Carboniferous forest was no wilderness of chaos, but a system ruled by those who controlled ground, air, and water. The giants did not simply live in their environment, they sculpted it, reshaping paths, altering populations, and forcing every species around them to adjust. The echoes of those struggles remain within us, coded into instincts that stir when the night is too quiet, when unseen motion rustles at the edge of perception, when our breath quickens at the knowledge that something larger, something older, might still be watching from the dark. The forest floor belonged to giants, but their reign was never secure. The world itself shifted beneath them, reshaping the stage, rewriting the rules, forcing even the strongest to bow to pressures beyond their control. What dominated one age would become fragile in the next, as new forces began to rise and new threats redefined the balance. The reign of giants, though fierce, was always balanced on the edge of change. Power was not always measured in size or speed. In the Carboniferous world, power often flowed invisibly, delivered through a drop of fluid that changed the course of life in seconds. The giants of 8 legs carried within their fangs a weapon that rewrote the rules of survival. Venom did not kill with brute force. It bypassed muscle, pierced defenses, and rewired the body from the inside out. The story of venom begins humbly. Before it was a weapon, it was digestion itself. Early arachnids secreted enzymes to break down prey outside the body, softening tissues so they could drink nourishment instead of tearing it. Over time, those enzymes sharpened in effect, no longer waiting until after capture but deployed at the very moment of attack. What began as food processing became a tool of immobilization, then a weapon of war. Once toxins entered the bloodstream of prey, the landscape of battle was forever changed. The neurotoxins of the giants were not blunt instruments. They worked with a precision that biology rarely achieves. When injected, they slipped between nerves and muscles, interrupting signals with surgical accuracy. A struggling synapsid might suddenly stiffen, its body frozen while its mind still raced with awareness. A reptile could collapse mid-sprint, limbs refusing to respond to the brain's desperate commands. Paralyzing venom did not always kill immediately. It created a living larder, prey held motionless yet alive, preserved for days while the predator fed slowly. For prey, survival meant adapting not only to the spider's strength but also to its chemistry. Defensive countermeasures began to appear, subtle changes in blood composition or nerve receptors that made toxins less effective. Some amphibians carried natural peptides that blunted venom's ability to bind. Others developed behaviors that indirectly resisted chemical warfare, shaking violently when bitten to dislodge fangs before venom could be fully injected, or biting back to break the predator's grip. Resistance was never perfect, but each adjustment stretched the time between bite and collapse, buying precious seconds to escape. This was no static struggle but an arms race measured in molecules. As prey adapted, predators escalated. Toxins diversified, some targeting muscles directly, others overwhelming the heart or lungs. Some venoms carried a mix, one component to paralyze, another to destroy tissue, a third to inflict searing pain that sapped the will to resist. Prey, in turn, evolved countermeasures just as diverse. A single receptor change might protect against one toxin, only for another variant to exploit a new weakness. Evolution wrote and rewrote this chemical dialogue in endless cycles, leaving no victor but ensuring both sides grew more complex. Not all venoms served only to attack. Some arachnids used chemical secretions defensively, releasing noxious compounds that deterred rivals or dissuaded larger predators. The air itself carried messages encoded in scent, announcing territory or warning of danger. In this world, chemistry was not merely internal, but external, woven into communication, survival, and dominance. The Carboniferous forest was as much a battlefield of molecules as of claws and fangs. Remarkably, fragments of this story remain preserved in stone. Fossilized glands, though flattened by time, reveal traces of the structures that once manufactured poison. In certain deposits, microscopic analysis exposes residues that mirror the proteins of modern venoms, suggesting their ancient origins. The molecules may have degraded, but their fingerprints linger, enough for scientists to reconstruct probable sequences and compare them to their living descendants. The fact that venom can leave shadows in stone speaks to its central role in survival. It was too important not to be written into the fossil record. Modern tools extend this preservation into revelation. CT scans peel back layers of rock to reveal gland structures hidden for hundreds of millions of years. Three-dimensional modeling allows researchers to reconstruct the channels through which venom once flowed, mapping pathways from gland to fang with uncanny precision. Each discovery pushes the timeline of chemical weaponry further back, confirming that the art of venom was not a late innovation, but a foundational survival strategy present at the dawn of complex predation. Venom's legacy stretches into the present in ways that reach beyond fear. For humans, the chemistry of ancient predators carries unexpected gifts. Modern pharmaceutical research mines the venoms of living arachnids, scorpions, and snakes for compounds that heal rather than harm. Molecules that once silenced nerves now inspire treatments for chronic pain. Enzymes that disrupted blood flow suggest therapies for strokes or heart disease. Even toxins that paralyze muscles find medical use in controlled doses, harnessed for surgery or cosmetic application. Each innovation draws a line back to the Carboniferous forest, where the first steps of this biochemical evolution unfolded. The connection between past and present is not accidental, but fundamental. Evolution rarely discards tools that work. The venom of ancient arachnids laid the blueprint for molecules so effective that their descendants still carry them today. Studying these lineages allows researchers to glimpse not only the origins of chemical warfare, but also the potential for medical breakthroughs hidden in nature's oldest weapons. Venom is a paradox, born of death, refined by violence, yet now a source of healing and discovery. In the Carboniferous forest, however, it was only death that mattered. Each drop delivered through fangs the size of daggers could end a life, preserve a meal, or tilt the balance of competition. For the prey who resisted, survival came at the cost of constant vigilance, their bodies forced to adapt against a tide of invisible chemistry. For the predators, venom was more than a weapon. It was identity, the essence of their reign. The forest floor belonged to those who commanded not only muscle and speed, but the unseen empire of molecules coursing through their prey. The Venom Chronicles were written in silence, without spectacle, delivered in moments too small for the eye, yet decisive enough to shape ecosystems. Their story continued in the shadows of the Carboniferous jungles, driving evolution forward, one drop of poison at a time. The reign of giants did not end with a single catastrophe. It ended with the slow suffocation of a world that had once been a paradise for monsters. The very air that had fueled their enormous bodies began to betray them. Oxygen levels, once high enough to set forests ablaze from the smallest spark, began to decline. For a predator whose body depended on every surge of that abundance, the shift was devastating. Muscles that once moved with hydraulic precision faltered, lungs that once flooded with oxygen strained to keep pace, and the biological machines of the Carboniferous world began to stall. The change did not happen in an instant. It crept through millennia, the air thinning, the forests darkening, the rules of survival shifting beneath the feet of giants. What had once been an oxygen-rich kingdom began to starve its own rulers. With less oxygen available, the metabolic demands of huge arachnids and insects became unsustainable. Their once powerful respiratory systems could no longer deliver enough fuel to power their movements. Size, once an advantage, now became a liability, a weight dragging them toward extinction. As the air thinned, the climate itself began to turn. The greenhouse warmth that had wrapped the Carboniferous in humid abundance gave way to a cooling phase. Ice advanced along the poles, locking away water and reshaping global circulation. Vast swamps that had sprawled across continents shrank and fragmented. The endless forests of towering lycopsids, once the green engines of the planet, began to falter. Their decline was not just the loss of shelter, but the loss of oxygen factories. Each fallen tree, each vanished swamp, pushed the giants further toward collapse. This was the beginning of an extinction cascade. Forests did not die alone. They dragged entire ecosystems down with them. Arachnids lost their hunting grounds in the canopy and the underbrush. Massive millipedes, once armored locomotives of the forest floor, saw their food sources vanish. Amphibians that relied on constant moisture found themselves stranded in drying landscapes. Every link in the chain snapped in sequence, tightening a noose around the great creatures of the Carboniferous. The hunters and the hunted alike found themselves caught in a world unraveling. Survival in this collapsing world favored a different strategy. Where once size had been power, now smallness became salvation. Tiny bodies required less oxygen, demanded fewer resources, and could slip into microhabitats that still offered shelter and food. The mammal's ancestors, once forced underground by towering predators, now found their enforced smallness transformed into their greatest advantage. Burrows insulated them from temperature swings, darkness shielded them from predators, and their compact frames thrived where the giants faltered. Miniaturization was no longer a compromise. It was the only viable path forward. In these smallest survivors, new possibilities began to emerge. Freed from the oppressive shadow of titanic arachnids and insects, they explored new niches. Some adapted to colder conditions with thicker fur-like coverings, conserving heat in a cooling climate. Others experimented with varied diets, no longer limited to the narrow margins of survival, but expanding into seeds, insects, and carrion. With giants gone, opportunities opened like doorways into an unexplored world. Each small adjustment became the seed of future diversity. This was the dawn of an adaptive radiation. The survivors multiplied into forms better suited for the fractured ecosystems left behind. Where one lineage discovered nocturnal life as a permanent strategy, another discovered agility in climbing new vegetation. Where some relied on sharp senses of smell to navigate darkness, others honed rapid reflexes for sudden flight from danger. Every evolutionary experiment that had been suppressed under the dominance of giants now burst forward, branching in directions that would define the mammalian story for hundreds of millions of years. Yet even as the world shrank, the memory of terror did not fade. The long age of predation under arachnid rule left its imprint not only on anatomy, but on instinct. The hair-trigger reflexes, the startle responses, the deep-rooted fear of sudden movement in the dark, all were sculpted in the crucible of the Carboniferous. The inheritance was more than physical survival. It was a psychological shaping carried forward into every mammalian lineage that followed. The great dying had begun. It was not spectacular like a comet strike, not a single apocalyptic moment, but a long, grinding shift that dismantled one kingdom and set the stage for another. The world of giants was closing, and in its place, a quieter, smaller, more adaptable world was rising. The forests that once echoed with the movements of colossal arachnids grew silent, replaced by the subtle stirrings of creatures that would one day inherit the earth. The reign of monsters had ended, but their shadow stretched far into the age to come. The silence that followed the fall of the giants was not empty. It carried echoes, imprints etched so deeply into the biology of their prey that they would never vanish. Even now, millions of years later, those echoes rise unbidden in the human mind. A flicker at the edge of vision, the silhouette of long legs against a wall, and the ancient terror stirs again. Our disproportionate fear of spiders is not irrational, it is ancestral memory. It is survival engraved in flesh and nerve. To understand this fear is to look backward into a world where failing to notice a shifting shadow meant death. The human brain, with all its modern complexity, still carries a circuit older than speech or writing, a predator detection system refined under the rule of eight-legged hunters. This system does not wait for conscious reasoning. It fires instantly, bypassing thought. A spider on the periphery of sight produces a jolt of electricity through the nervous system, the same surge that once propelled our ancestors into burrows before fangs could strike. Neurology bears the mark of that age. The amygdala, seat of fear and instinct, is primed to overreact to certain shapes and movements. Studies reveal that humans detect images of spiders faster than almost any other form, even among cluttered backgrounds. This is not coincidence. It is a relic of nights when the failure to recognize the outline of long legs meant being dragged into silk and darkness. Our startle reflex, our instant jump at sudden movement, is a direct inheritance from that predatory theatre. The psychological landscape shaped by those encounters did more than create fear. It built hypervigilance. The ability to scan, to recognize patterns in leaves or shadows, became a vital survival tool. The brain learned to fill in gaps, to connect fragments into threatening wholes, to assume danger even in uncertainty. That same vigilance still pulses in modern life, expressed as the tendency to see faces in clouds, to feel watched in empty rooms, to jump at imagined movement. Evolution wired us to err on the side of fear because fear meant survival. Arachnophobia, spanning cultures and continents, cannot be reduced to mere superstition. It is universal because it is ancient. Unlike snakes or big cats whose dangers vary by region, giant arachnids were once a global reality. Entire lineages of our ancestors lived in their shadow. The disproportionate terror we feel is not learned but inherited, passed down through nervous systems tuned to the possibility of 8 legs in the dark. In this sense, the spider has never left us. It walks invisibly in our genes, dictating how we respond before we even understand why. Our sensory world still reflects those ancient pressures. Humans possess a field of peripheral vision unusually wide for primates, a legacy of scanning for movement at the edges of sight. The brain's sensitivity to sudden shifts in motion, particularly small, scuttling motions, remains heightened far beyond practical need in modern environments. Even our ability to track multiple moving objects simultaneously, a skill used today in sports or driving, arose in part from the need to follow the unpredictable trajectories of predators in a dense forest. The legacy is not limited to individual fear. It reaches into the fabric of human society. In the Carboniferous, survival was not the achievement of a lone creature, but of groups bound by communication and cooperation. Early mammalian ancestors survived by huddling, by warning one another, by sharing vigilance. Those who could signal danger quickly and effectively preserved not only themselves but their kin. From this foundation, the roots of human communication grew. Alarm calls became language. Shared fear became shared story. Survival was not only written into our bodies, but into our culture. Even today, the echoes remain in the way humans respond collectively to threat. The ripple of alarm that moves through a crowd when someone spots danger, the instinct to band together against a perceived predator, the comfort found in group protection. All are shadows of burrows filled with trembling creatures listening for the scrape of legs outside. Social bonds were not luxuries, but lifelines, refined in nights when predators dominated the forest floor. The spider, then, is not merely a creature of the present, it is a living symbol of a trial that shaped us. Every time a human recoils, every time a child screams at a harmless household spider, they are replaying a story older than humanity itself. The fear is not weakness, it is memory. It is the whisper of an age when death descended silently from above, and only those who listened, who flinched, who fled, lived to pass their instincts forward. The world of giants has vanished, but the imprint of their reign has not. It lives in our neural pathways, in our reflexes, in the way we perceive movement and trust one another in danger. The terror of the Carboniferous is not buried in stone. It is alive, written in our DNA, carried by every human heartbeat into the present age. The imprint of that ancient terror lingers in our blood, but it does more than haunt our instincts. It connects us, across an unbroken chain of survival, to a world so alien it seems more dream than history. 300 million years separate us from the forests where giant arachnids reigned. Yet the thread that binds us to them is taut and unbroken. To walk forward is also to carry backward, to live in a present shaped by shadows cast deep in time. Picture that journey in its full arc, from damp burrows scraped into Carboniferous soil to the gleam of modern cities lit against the night. The same lineage has endured. Once, our ancestors measured their days in heartbeats, fleeing beneath roots and stones. Today, we measure time in centuries and civilizations, yet both stories belong to the same thread, woven through terrors, collapses, extinctions, and unlikely survivals. The arachnids that hunted the forest floor and canopy are gone, but their legacy remains etched into the architecture of life that followed. By driving prey underground, they shaped the physiology of mammals, the alert senses, the nocturnal adaptations, the heightened reflexes. By forcing survival in groups, they planted the seeds of cooperation, which later grew into the complex social structures that define humanity. By teaching our ancestors that vigilance and memory could mean the difference between life and death, they carved lessons into our nervous systems that still fire in the presence of small, spindly legs today. It is easy to imagine ourselves as the triumphant heirs, but triumph was never the point. Survival was. Our ancestors were not conquerors, they were survivors, shaped by forces they could not comprehend. The giants of the Carboniferous were architects of fear, but also architects of resilience. Every adaptation, every instinct that passed the test of that brutal world, built the foundation on which our story stands. To reflect on this is to shift perspective. We are not the inevitable heroes of Earth's saga. We are participants in a continuum where power rises and collapses, where predators dominate and vanish, where survival often belongs not to the strongest, but to the smallest, the swiftest, the most adaptable. The reign of arachnids ended, not because prey defeated them, but because the world itself changed. Forests shrank, oxygen thinned, climates cooled. Giants faded and small creatures flourished. That pattern has repeated across ages, reminding us that dominance is always temporary. In their fall lies a lesson for us. Just as the Carboniferous forests once stood vast and invincible, today's ecosystems may seem enduring. Yet history warns us how fragile such balances truly are. The collapse of biodiversity in the ancient world rewrote the rules of life, stripping away entire orders of creatures. To recognize that history is to recognize the urgency of conservation now. The life around us is not guaranteed. Every extinction narrows the possibilities of the future. Every forest cut, every habitat lost, echoes the collapse that once silenced the age of giants. Understanding those ancient ecosystems grants us more than knowledge. It grants perspective. The creatures that once terrified our ancestors also sustained the complexity of their world. Predators controlled populations, prey shaped environments, plants pumped life into the atmosphere. It was a web where every strand mattered. The same is true today. Wolves, sharks, insects, creatures often feared or dismissed, are threads in the living fabric. To pull them out is to risk unraveling the whole. The fear of spiders, then, is more than a phobia. It is a reminder of interconnectedness. When the chill runs down the spine at the sight of long legs crossing a wall, it is not simply disgust or irrational terror. It is the echo of survival, of an ancient world pressing through the veil of time. It is the body's way of remembering where it came from and what it endured. Each heartbeat carries that memory forward. Each flinch, each shiver is an echo of a night long ago when danger moved silently on 8 legs. To feel that fear is to be linked directly to ancestors who crouched in burrows, who pressed together for safety, who lived because they noticed, because they feared. Their survival is our inheritance. Our fear is their gift. So as we stand in the modern world, we are never entirely free from that thread. We carry it in our DNA, in our minds, in the reflexes we cannot control. We carry it in our societies, built on cooperation, born of fear. We carry it in our stories, myths, and bedtime tales, many of which still paint the spider as a figure of dread. Those stories are not new. They are ancient, retold in different tongues, but rooted in the same soil where our ancestors trembled. Every encounter with a spider is a meeting across time. Their small forms remind us of giants lost, of forests that no longer exist, of battles fought in shadows long before our kind walked upright. They remind us that the past is never gone. It lives within us, woven into our senses, our psychology, our very survival. So when you next feel that sudden primal chill, pause. Do not dismiss it as foolishness. Recognize it as the deepest memory you carry, a memory older than humanity, older than language, older even than the continents as we know them. It is the whisper of a world of monsters, a whisper that survived extinction itself. Thank you for walking this journey through deep time, for stepping into forests lit by fire and shadow, for crouching with our ancestors in their burrows, for meeting the gaze of giants. The most terrifying bedtime stories are the ones that actually happened, and their echoes live on within us still. Rest well tonight knowing this. We survived the age of giants.